So for this next step, what we're going to do is take our arms. Okay, so here's my arm. Right, there we go. And I fold it in half. So fold it in half like this. Then we're going to match it up to our shoulder. So the bottom is our underarm seam, okay, and our shoulder's right here. What we're going to do is simply sew it together. Okay, just make sure the top matches the top, the bottom seams match together, and we're going to sew it all together. Okay, the neck we're also going to sew it together. Right, so just make sure that your seams are nice and smooth, and then you want to do the same with the other arm as well. Sew it all together, and then you're going to sew all the way down to the bottom. So we're essentially just sewing the sweater all together right now. Okay, and we're almost finished. So there's no set way to sew the sweater together as long as it comes together in a neat fashion. That's the most important thing you're going to worry about. So once I'm done this, I will meet you back here where we will do our finishing touches just to make sure that it fits properly. Okay? So here I have my sweater. I'm almost finished putting it together, but what I want to do is show you the process that I did to put it together and to sew it. Okay? So right now I have my sleeves attached, my body is together, right? And the only piece left I have is the end of the sweater here. But right now, let me show you what I did. So I started with the neck. Okay, so this is the front of the sweater. And I started with the neck. So for the neck and only the neck, we want to make sure that our seam is on the outside. Okay, because it's a turtleneck, when we fold it over like this, this part here will be on the outside. And this part here will be on the inside. So that's why we want our seam to be on the outside of the sweater. Just like I have here. Okay? Make sense? So I started here and I sewed all the way down to here. Then at this point, and now remember, we do not have our sleeves attached yet. Okay? At this point, we have our neck attached, and we have our front, and we have our back. Our front and our back are not yet attached, okay? So after I've done the neck, I want to turn the sweater inside out. And the reason I want to turn the sweater inside out is because when I sew it, I want the seams to be on the inside, right? Only the neck, we do it on the outside because it's a turtleneck, we flip it over. So I turn my sweater inside out, and I'm starting to work on the shoulders. So for the shoulders, you just put them together and you sew it. The left one, the right one. Okay? After that, what I did is I began to attach the sleeves. So for the sleeves, I folded it in half, and I took, and remember the seam of the sleeve is going to be on the underside of the sleeve. Okay, so the seam is going to be here. I took one end of the sleeve and I attached it to the underarm, and I sewed all the way up the seam, around, down to here. Okay? And so once that's completed, your sweater will have the underside of the sleeve not finished, and the side of the sweater, the front and the back, will not be put together yet. Only this part will be sewn together, the shoulder. Okay? Then what I did was that I started from the bottom here, and I sewed one continuous seam from the bottom up, and I continued under the arm, and I continued all the way to the end of the sweater here. Okay? And so that's what I did for the other arm as well, the same process. I did the shoulder. Then I lined my sleeve up, started at the underarm, went around, till I got to the bottom here again. Then at this point, this part of the sleeve is attached. I started at the bottom of my sweater. I did a continuous seam, sew, and I keep sewing all the way to the end of the sleeve, like this, okay? And that's what I did for my sweater. And that's how I sewed my sweater together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how I actually sewed it. So here I am showing you how I sewed my sweater together. So the method that I used was the invisible stitch, and this is how it goes. So I have my yarn needle here, I've got my yarn, and I've got the end of my sweater which I've almost completed. Okay, as you can see that I've done this part already. So a basic stitch is when you, this is how I'm going to describe it, is when you sew this way and around, this way and around, right? It's more vertical, right? You go up and down. With the invisible method, it's more horizontal. You go side to side like a snake. Okay, so we're going side to side like this. And what that does is when you complete your seam, and it hides it well, right? So even if you pulled, so even if your two pieces are pulled out a little, you can't see the seam, right? Versus with a typical basic stitch, oftentimes when you pull it a little, you're able to see the lines of the thread, which is what you do not want, okay? So that's why I like the invisible stitch when sewing my sweater together. What you want to look out for is we've got two different patterns on this sweater. We've got this pattern here, and we have a rib stitch, right? And we want to do the invisible seam slightly different for each pattern. Let's start with this pattern here, okay? So this is what our edge looks like. And when you look at the edge, you can make out that you have the top, and you can make out that you have what's underneath the top, like right here, like right here. You have all these stitches underneath this top line, right? You've got a stitch there, you've got a stitch here, right? You've got all these wonderful stitches, and these are the stitches that we're going to pull through when we sew it together, all right? So I'm starting on this side and I'm going this way. So here we have the bottom one. It's the same thing. We do not want to go straight at the top here like that, right? That's not going to give us a nice seam. Instead, we want to go on the inside. So remember, I turned my sweater inside out. It's inside out already. Okay, this is the seam. It's on the inside, right? This is the outside, right? This is the outside. So I do not want to go on the top here. I want to go underneath the top. So underneath the top, on the inside here, like this, I pull up a stitch, and I pull my needle through. Then I want to go this way. So we're going to go back and forth. So I take this top one, and I look. Here's my top. Right underneath the top, I find a stitch, and I pull it through. Okay? Then I go work on the bottom one. Right under here, I find a stitch, and I pull it through. Right, then I go on the top, right under here, I find a stitch, and I pull it through. Okay? Just like that. Right? So when I go through, so the idea behind this is that when I find a stitch here, I move slightly up on the bottom, I find a new stitch, like that, and I pull it through. And then I want to match the bottom to the top. So instead of going slightly up here, right, I want to match it. So here's my stitch on the bottom. My stitch on the top will be somewhere around here. I match it and pull it through. And then when I'm back at the bottom, right, I don't want to match the bottom again because that's where our previous stitch was, right? We want to progress. So to progress, we move a little bit further. We find the next stitch, pull it through, and then here we match the top, and pull it through, right? Then we progress, match the top, and then we keep going to the end here. So when we get to this part here, let me show you. Now here I am with the rib stitch section. So for the rib stitch, for your neck, for your sleeves, for the bottom of your sweater, all in the rib stitch, we want to follow it this way. So it's very similar to this, okay? And the fact that we want to do our stitch in the, not in the top, but the one below. But I'm going to show you what I mean. So again, we're working the invisible stitch that goes like this, left, right, like a snake, horizontally. But here we have our rib. So the idea behind it is that when we sew it, we're going to try to mimic this rib. So we want a continuous rib stitch. When we fold the sleeve over and we look at it from the outside, we want the seam to be invisible, right? And because the rib stitch is in this pattern, if you do it the wrong way, you can easily see the seam. So by doing it this way that I'm going to show you, hopefully you will succeed and create the invisible seam for the rib, right? So in this particular rib, when we fold it and we put it together like this, we see that we've got the raised section and the dented section, right? So we've got two raises together, so that means that the seam that we're going to sew together will be a dent, right? Right, two raises, so the seam will be a dent. So we're going to try and mimic this dent. And it's very simple. This is how you do it. Our top here, we do not want to sew into there. So just like this part here, we want to sew into the piece that's beneath it. So here I am. My string is at the top, so I want to start with the bottom. So this top part here, we do not want to see. We do not want to sew. Instead, we're going to go right underneath it. So right underneath this top part here is this, right? Right underneath this top part here is all these, see? All these stitches. And these are the stitches that we want to sew through, right? Through this little line here. So we're at the top, we're going to go to the bottom, and we're going to take one of the stitches and sew it through. Then, same thing, now we're going to go to the top, we're going to match where we are, pull it through. Then we're going to go to the bottom, we're going to progress, so we're going to go slightly further. And you want to take your time, and you want your stitches to be close together, right? You don't want any gaps when you sew. So just take your time and follow it like this. Right, so this top here, remember, we do not want to sew. Do not sew into the top part like that. Look on its side. See what's underneath that, all these underneath it, and sew underneath it like this. Okay, and that's how you want to do your invisible seam. So you can see that our seam is forming, and when we turn it inside out, you can see here, right? This is what we're trying to mimic, this dented part. And this is what we've achieved. This dented part, we've got a raised part here, our raised part here, and our dented part in the center. And that's what we want to achieve for our sweater. Let me show you the other sleeve. So here I have my other sleeve, I've completed it, right? This is where our seam is. This is the outside. The inside is here, right? There's our seam. And this is the outside. And when we look at it, it's invisible. So you can't see it. You cannot tell where the seam is. But the seam's right here. When we pull it out, right? You can see that it mimics this, our real dents, right? Dent, raise, dent, raise, dent, and here's our seam. See? It's invisible. You can't see it. So that's what we want to try to do, and that's how I did my seams, and this is how I sewed my sweater together. So I'm going to continue doing it that way, and when I'm done sewing it, I will show you the final result. So here we have the final result. I'm really happy about how it turned out. Now the image you see, I did already tailor the sides in. It was a lot more boxier before, but to tailor it in, all you have to do is put it on the wearer and pinch the sides of the sweater to grab the extra fabric that hangs along the side. All that extra fabric is what we want to tailor in. So what you're going to do is pinch the sides equally on both sides and see how much you need to take in so that the sweater fits the body better. So for me, I took about 1.5 inches on both sides. Your measurements will be custom to you. Once you figure out how much on each side to take away, I will show you the technique to tailor the extra fabric. Note, we do not have to cut any fabric. All we are going to do is sew the sides once more and leave it like that. So you want to measure from the underarms straight down to the waist and see how much extra slack you have to take in from underneath the underarms down to the waist. So I have my swatch here because I already did my sweater. So I'm going to show you on this swatch the technique that I use. After you've measured and you're ready to take in the sweater, you want to turn it inside out because we want to put the seams on the inside. So after you turn it inside out and you figured that, for example, you want to take 1 inch off of both sides, then we are ready to go. Okay, so imagine this is your sweater and it's inside out. I have my tapestry needle and I have my yarn attached to it. So you want to take your yarn and cut yourself an ample length that will give you enough string so that it'll sew all the way across from the bottom of your sweater all the way up to the arms, right where we want to tailor it in. So after you have your tapestry needle and you cut enough yarn for you to work your piece, what we're going to do is we're going to start. It doesn't matter if you start at the bottom or if you start underneath the arms, but for this instance, I'm going to start at the bottom of the sweater, and you're just going to find where you want to tailor it. So if I, for example, want about 1 inch in, what I'm going to do, take in, you can do this 2 ways. If you find that the bottom of the sweater, when attached to the body, when the person's wearing it, if you find that the bottom is a good width, that it's not too loose at the bottom, then you don't have to take in the bottom. You can simply start at the very corner and then tailor it on an angle and then straighten it out afterwards if you need like 1 inch from the sides, like this, right? If you find that the bottom is too wide, there's too much slack here, and he's too thin, then you can actually just start tailoring it right here, and that'll take away however much you want to take away. Okay? So if you start from here, you're going to simply sew until you straighten yourself out, and then continue sewing. If you start here, you're just going to sew straight. Okay? So, for example, for this particular example, I'm just going to start here. So I'm going to pretend that the guy's super skinny and that we need to take away about 1 inch from the side, including the bottom of the waist. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start at the end here. I'm just going to poke it in like that on both sides. So again, remember the sides of the sweater, we already sewed it together. On this particular swatch, I didn't do it, so that's why it's still loose. But yours would have been sewed together, okay? So we're going to take our tapestry needle and insert it, and we're going to pull the yarn all the way through until we reach the end of the yarn, right? And that's why we want to have ample length of yarn to work with. So then you can do this 2 ways. I'm going to show you the way that I did it. But the first way that you can do, which is a lot slower, is that you can just insert the tapestry needle back in to the bottom and pull out. Pull everything through, and then back in from the bottom to the front like this. And you want to make sure that your stitches are about 2 or 3 knitted stitches wide. Okay, so you don't want it to be too close together because that'll take forever, and you don't want to be too far away because that'll create gaps in your stitches. You want it at a good separation, and I found that around 2 or 3 stitches wide for one sewing stitch is a good way to go. That was the first method. To me it's too slow. I like doing it the second method better. So this is the second way that I decided to sew. So instead of going in and out and in and out, all I did was I inserted my needle in to the bottom, and then I brought it back out like this. Then I inserted back in again to the bottom, brought it back out, and then I kept going for a little bit. As you can see, we've made some progress, and then all I did was pull it through. All that's going to do is allow you to hand sew a good chunk of the piece all at once, okay, instead of going in and out, in and out. So it's like a dolphin popping out of the water, right? You go in, and you just bring it up, and in, and then if you continue, bring it back up, and then you just pull through. And that'll allow you to hand sew this piece a lot quicker. Okay, so once again, this piece would be inside out, and we would be making our seams here. So imagine this being closed. This is what it would look like. I'm going to pull this tight for now. See? If we pull it tight here, you can see that we don't see the seams. Because this is inside out, once we reverse it, we will see that it would look like this. And you can see that you can't see the seams, right? You cannot see the seam when you sewed it, right? So it's still invisible. So even if you reverse it, right, it's still invisible. You can't see it. So that's how we're going to tailor it in. And in the end, you have this piece here that's on the inside. And unless you have too much slack that it really doesn't work and you have to cut it, that would be the last resort, and then just sew the ends together. But for me, I didn't need to cut it. I just left all of this bulk here. I left it all here and just wore it with it, and you really can't tell that it's there. But it does make a big difference once you tailor it to the body, okay? And if you do it like this, it's very simple, and it's actually a lot quicker than you might think, okay? I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Thank you for all your support, and subscribe to my channel for more videos.